participation here on this Wednesday morning, this warm Wednesday morning. I wanted to introduce Senator Moran this morning. Senator Moran has been in the U.S. Senate since 2011. After a 2010 election, served in Congress 7 terms before that. Originally from Plainville, Kansas, and currently lives in Manhattan. You like how I'm just doing this off of memory? This is good, isn't it? And then has actually serves on three committees in the Senate: Appropriations, Banking, and I have to look at my notes for the third, Veterans Affairs. So we're really pleased to have him here today. I will say on a personal note that Senator Moran and his local staff are great advocates for Ottawa, great advocates for economic development and everything we do in a community, and it's really our pleasure to have you here this morning.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
That was a great introduction.
Thanks.
Sometimes people read page after page and they put the audience to sleep before I have the chance. Thank you all very much for the chance to be back in Franklin County, to be here in Ottawa. This is one of a long series of what I call a town hall meeting. And my general practice is to speak for a few minutes and then let folks give their complaints, suggestions, marching orders, instructions to me for a lot longer. And this is very useful to me. It was mentioned that I was a House member. I represented the 1st District of Kansas, kind of the western 3/4 of our state. There were 69 counties in that congressional district, and we had one of these kind of town hall meetings every year in each of the 69 counties. When I was elected to the United States Senate, it's now 105 counties, a bit more difficult, but we have made the rounds once already of 105 town hall meetings, and we're doing it a second time. This is probably about halfway through the second round of 105 listening stops across the state. Last night I was in Paola. I leave here and have a town hall meeting in Baldwin later this morning. Then I'm over to Olathe to be at Olathe Rotary this afternoon. And these are, I hope it will appear to you that I'm telling you the truth. These are useful to me. The things I prioritize, the issues I pay the most attention to, the goal of trying to bring common sense and good judgment to Washington, D.C. is affected by the conversations I have at this setting. My family and I never moved to Washington, D.C., so I'm back in Kansas every weekend. We do live in Manhattan. For the K-Staters, for the Jayhawks, I'm a failed parent. Both of our daughters went to Kansas State University. We have moved from Hayes to Manhattan about 2.5 years ago, in large part because the second daughter is in veterinary medical school. This puts mom and daughter together in the same town, actually the same house, while I'm not home very much. So it was putting our family together. Although the daughter got married over the weekend, and so she's moved out. I think my wife is fine with that, but she took the cat with her, and I think that's causing the problems that there's now no one in the household. So there's people in this room that I don't know, so I'll take just a minute to be more introductory of me and what I focus on. What got me interested in being willing to put my name on a ballot and run for office really was, in part, growing up in a small town in Kansas and a belief that rural America is a place that's worth trying to keep around a while longer. So in many ways, I think we have kind of a local chamber of commerce point of view in Washington, D.C. What can we do to help? What can we do to make certain that good things happen in Kansas? During my time as a House member and now as a senator, there's still that Kansas focus on agriculture, on farmers and ranchers. Still that focus on health care. How do you keep hospital doors open in a community like yours, attract physicians, have pharmacy on Main Street, have home health care, nursing home care. A lot of both of those things, agriculture and health care, have to do with Washington, D.C. In the case of health care, it's Medicare. Regulations, just the role the federal government plays in health care. In agriculture, there's a farm bill, but trade, regulations, the tax code, there are things that matter as whether or not, and I recognize that, in fact, it used to be that everybody you met grew up on a farm. Today, there's a long distance between Kansas and family agriculture in many instances, but there's no community in our state that's not impacted by whether or not agriculture has success. Then even in the more Chamber of Commerce point of view, it's the business climate, the business community. I just did an interview with KLWN in Lawrence. You know, what's your primary interest? It's how do we have a growing economy, create jobs, give people hope that life is going to be better, they can take care of their families, save for their retirement, help their kids get through education. We need a better economic opportunity for all Americans. Everybody ought to be able to pursue the American dream. And our interest is from Main Street. This is not true in Ottawa, but I've told folks in Washington, D.C. that where I come from, Economic development is often whether or not there's a grocery store in town, and almost no one in Washington, D.C. has any appreciation for how that could ever be a challenge for any community in the country. The grocery store is down the street, but it's also the keeping a pharmacy on Main Street, a hardware store. One of the things about representing the 1st District of Kansas and coming from a small town that I take to Washington, D.C. is that the fixed cost of being in business matter. I don't think there's a cause and effect, at least I hope there's not in this what I'm going to say. I think the entire time that I represented the 1st District of Kansas in Washington, D.C., I don't think I represented a single growing community. You're fortunate to be a place in which growth is occurring. But one of the things you learn in a town in which there's no more people moving in is that the fixed cost of being in business matter. When taxes go up, workers' compensation premiums, healthcare costs, the chances of a business surviving by being able to sell more things to more people doesn't exist in many places in Kansas. And therefore, you got to be very careful about what you do to the cost of that business and whether or not, then the consequence of whether or not it's going to remain in business. So business issues, helping your community attract more and better jobs is something we are very interested in doing. Technology, we try to make sure Kansas doesn't get left behind in decisions made in Washington, D.C. Broadband and other technology can do great things in rural America. That places that our libraries, hospitals, schools, businesses, we can do things in Franklin County that we couldn't do years ago because of technology. And there are policies and people who don't think about us. We are not understood in Washington, D.C. Rural America is something that people don't think about. I mentioned agriculture. One time, this is back in my House days, a congresswoman from Connecticut came to me on the House floor. She says, "Congressman Moran, I understand that you know and care about agriculture. Would you please come visit with me? I just became the chairperson of the Agricultural Appropriations Subcommittee. Rosa DeLauro, this is when the Democrats took the majority. This is not a partisan statement, George. This is when the Democrats took the majority of the House. Rosa DeLauro, New Haven, Connecticut, became the chairperson of the Ag Committee Appropriations. She represents Yale University, the suburbs of New York City that spill over into her state. She invited me to her office to say what's important to agriculture. A few minutes into the conversation, after I'd tried to explain the farm bill, crop insurance, those kind of things, she goes, no, that's not what I want to know. Just tell me, Jerry, what does a farmer do?" And that's the kind of circumstance that we find ourselves in as folks who come from where we come from, people who don't understand and appreciate. And the good news, this isn't making fun of Rosa DeLauro at all. The good news is she's asking the questions. And we actually invited her to Kansas and she came. So we're not understood. Education, there may be folks, school board or superintendent here. Mostly what we do is try to keep the federal government out of our education system. Let us make decisions about how we educate our kids and get rid of the things that drive up the costs, the mandates. And we have a lot of work to do in that regard. Those are, Kansas issues. In my view, they're American issues, but there are broader things. I was ready to get out of politics until I watched the older daughter walk across the graduation stage. My parents' generation did a much better job of handing off a country to me and my generation than I'm doing or that we're doing for the next. And so we got to get our fiscal house in order. Huge national issues that we face. We have no choice but to deal with them. And so while there's always a Kansas or a local flavor to what we pay attention to, we're working hard to try to get our country's fiscal house in order, rein in the size and scope of government, make it more efficient, but really when things get so big, I don't know how anything in Washington, D.C. can be efficient. And over a long period of time, people have brought all their problems to Washington, problems that should be solved personally. It's personal responsibility, problems that should be solved in your family, your community, city council, city commission, county commission, the state of Kansas, as compared to a belief that all the things that go wrong in our lives, somebody in Washington, D.C. can figure out how to make them better. So we're working to try to make government smaller, and particularly the federal government, smaller in size and scope, try to get us to live within our means, try to make certain that the decisions that made are in Washington, D.C. have a significant level of common sense and a belief. And I get more conservative the further away from Kansas I get. And when you get to Washington, D.C., I think there's great value to being pretty conservative in the way that you view what should be happening there and how much money should be spent. I'd be glad to take the conversation whatever direction you'd like for it to go.
We want to make sure we get questions on the microphone, so if you have a question or comment, raise your hand and I'll bring it over to you. Maybe just announce your name and then ask your question.
My name is Earl Zimmerman. I'm a retired guy, and I was wondering, the the regulations on the small businessmen, anything being done to relieve some of that? It's really tough on, like you said, in the small town where you don't expand and the costs go up. Would tort reform help out in the medical area so the doctors wouldn't have to pay such, and health people wouldn't have to pay such high premiums? Is anything being done about that?
Mr. Zimmerman, let me answer your question in a broad sense and then narrow it down to the specific topics. There's a broad question that you ask, is anything being done? And the answer, in my view, is next to nothing is happening in Washington, D.C. to solve our country's problems. As I said earlier, I think we should be in session now, working on these things. And while I'm happy to be with you here in Ottawa this morning, I ought to be at my job in Washington, D.C. trying to solve problems. But the reality is that the Senate in particular doesn't function. It isn't functioning well, nothing happens there. And this will sound partisan, but just so you know where I'm coming from, my first month in the United States Senate, I was met on the Senate floor. My first conversation with a senator named Harry Reid went like this: Jerry, how do you like the Senate? It's a fine, pleasant conversation. He was being nice. My response was, I appreciate the opportunity Kansans have given me to work here on their behalf, but sir, it doesn't seem to me like we're going to do anything. To which he responded, Jerry, you just need to understand that we're not going to do anything till after the next election. That was an election ago. We're now in the next election, and we're still operating under this, we're not going to do anything. And I think the reason that this is the plan, I understand sometimes when Congress doesn't do anything, that's a problem. Actually, most of my life I thought when Congress wasn't doing anything it was a good thing. I actually think there's so many bad things that have occurred, we have an agenda to undo bad things. And so if we couldn't resolve differences and nothing was getting done, that'd kind of be one thing. But to actually have the plan to do nothing is very troublesome to me. And I think the motivation, the reason that we're in this circumstance is that Senator Reid has decided that it's politically smart for the re-election of his senators to make certain that they don't have to choose between President Obama's agenda that many of their constituents don't like. And so rather than put a senator in the position of having to choose, are they for the president's agenda or are they for some of their constituents, we just don't cast votes. Your question about regulations, one, and this is certainly a business issue, but it's an agricultural issue. This issue of lesser prairie chicken in Kansas, the issue of navigable waters. We have a bill, the appropriations bill for the EPA, that's on the Senate floor, ready to be voted on. We have offered an amendment to alter the issues related to how you define what waters can be regulated in the United States. And we think we have Democrats who will vote with us, and we might win. So the end result of that is not that we win, but the bill, is pulled from consideration, and no vote will occur, and the Department of Interior's appropriation will be the same as it was last year. There'll be a continuing resolution, all with the plan to make certain that there's no vote on the Senate that tells the president or tells the American people or reaches a conclusion as to how we want to define the role of the EPA in regulating water. But the business climate is, it's the same thing, regulation after regulation. Here's where I think we have the opportunity to help solve these problems of regulatory overreach, lack of common sense, lack of sound science. The appropriations process, I'm a member of the Appropriations Committee, and where that should be of help is we appropriate money for, as I mentioned, the EPA or the National Labor Relations Board. Or, as an appropriator, as a member of that committee, I have the ability to normally get the agency heads and secretaries on the phone because we determine how much money their agency gets, so they pay a little bit more attention to you. They want to get along. That gives you the opportunity to tell them what you think, not necessarily what I think, but what I think on behalf of Kansans. If we never appropriate money for them, they have little interest in having that conversation. It also has eliminated the chance that we have, as in the water issue or the lesser prairie chicken issue, to include an appropriation bill. No money can be spent by this agency to implement this stupid idea. We don't get the chance to do that. And so what, in my view, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, what you ought to want to have happen is a chance for your ideas to be considered, advanced, and votes taken. If I will cast votes that people in this room will disagree with. I hope I don't do it too often, I'm not one who takes a poll. I don't believe because 6 people are for something and 4 people are against something that I'm always with the 6. But I trust Kansans, and I spend a lot of time listening and visiting with them. And if I'm off base, I'll start, I mean, if I'm contrary to what many people are telling me, then I'll start rethinking how I think about things. See if I'm right, see if I'm wrong. But under any circumstance, I ought to be able to come home and explain to you why I voted a certain way. And then if we're in disagreement too much, you'll probably find somebody else to do the job. But I ought not be fearful of actually casting a vote. That's what you hired me to do. I'm working on short answers. Oh, George.
Senator Moran, waters of the U.S. I'm policy chairman for Local Farm Bureau, among other things, and we are encouraged to write letters, make contacts, and so forth. You know, that is such a large subject, or I might say it's kind of a stupid subject, the way it's been couched also, that it's hard to get your arms around with a pencil and a piece of paper. Gina McCarthy came to the Midwest and really kind of made fun of people in agriculture because they were so concerned about this. Oh, it's not going to hurt you. We're not going to do all these things. I think the theory here, though, that we ought to work under is that something is going to be passed, or it's going to be the edict from the EPA, which they won't do right away, but then some activist group will take it to the Supreme Court.
A couple of things to set the stage for what's being talked about here is that in the 60s, the Clean Water Act was passed. The EPA has jurisdiction along with the Corps of Engineers in its implementation and enforcement. And the EPA is proposed new rules that redefine what waters are. And in the Clean Water Act, what the EPA and the Corps of Engineers are entitled to regulate are waters of the United States that are navigable. Navigable to me means you can float a boat on it. What the EPA is saying is that any waters that affect navigable waters should be regulated. That is every drop of rainfall, any place, anytime, anywhere. And so they come, the Gina McCarthy that's mentioned here is the administrator of the EPA. She came to Kansas City, Missouri and conducted a meeting about this topic and tried to assure people that they were not expanding anything. It wouldn't have a single effect upon agriculture. However farmers and ranchers were operating today would be fine. They wouldn't have to change anything. But I didn't find many farmers who found that believable. And so the Farm Bureau in particular has got a program ongoing, involves the word ditch. Ditch the something.
Ditch the rule or something.
Ditch the rule. And so they're encouraging people to contact the EPA as this rule is being formulated. Even if you could believe the EPA and say we're not going to affect agriculture, does any of you believe that wouldn't affect your city, your county, all the things that we pay for as local taxpayers? And so we're trying to get some common sense and sound science, good judgment into the EPA. The other point that's raised here is that even though they may make the commitment that we're not going to enforce this beyond this level, what seems to happen so often, particularly with the EPA, is that there will be an environmental group that sues them for not doing their job. They then reach a settlement out of court. They reach an agreement, and then when I go complain about what the EPA is doing, they'll say, well, we had no choice. A judge told us we had to do this. And so it sets the stage for, even if today they say, and you believe them, that nothing more is going to happen, it sets the stage for additional federal involvement. And here's, my point would be is we have the what used to be called the Soil Conservation Service, NRSC, in Kansas, working with farmers, landowners to try to make sure that the water is clear and improved and conservation occurs. Whatever program we come up with to help maintain clean quality water, which is an important issue. I don't mean to discount the idea that we need clean water. Where I come from, man, water is golden. Every time somebody offers me a bottle or a glass of water, I always say, yes, even when I'm not thirsty. If you're from Hayes, you'll take water however you can get it. It's a real issue for us in Kansas. Water is important. And but we ought to be doing this in a local, cooperative way. as compared to somebody in Washington, D.C. telling us precisely how we have to do everything?
My name's Bill Lloyd, and I'm a vice president of the District 12 Water Board out of Melbourne.
Yes, sir.
We've been doing a lot of work in the past over in our area. We spent about $4 million in the last 2 or 3 years upgrading our system over there. We cover about 5 counties in this area. And
You're a rural water district that gets water from Melbourne?
Melbourne
Okay.
Lake, and we have we've been rated as one of the cleanest lakes in the state with grass runoff. Our water is clear. We've upgraded our facilities, like I just mentioned. We put in larger holding tanks for clear water, and we've had 2 or 3 other rural water districts come to us in the past 2 or 3 months is wanting to form a committee with us and perhaps lay lines to help other water districts if this water shortage in their area gets bad, where they can hook onto us and have more water coming in. And we do appreciate everything that's been done in your area for all the water districts as well as ours, and we do thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you for your local effort. One comment, and then yes, ma'am. Bill is here. My local representative, Bill's the former mayor of Iola, and he travels this part of Kansas. I want to make sure that you all know him, although he spends lots of time in Ottawa, in Franklin County. And I also would say that we do a weekly email newsletter, and if we're not spam to you and you're willing to give us your email address, every Monday we will send you an email that describes how I voted, what's going on, what issues I'm working on, where I'm going to be. And so, Bill, you might send it around. I've discovered nobody stops at a table on their way outside the door. But if you want to share your email address with us, you'll be added to an email newsletter. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Senator, for coming to Ottawa today. I'm Linda Reed. I have been following with interest your involvement with the VA systems. My dad was in World War II. I have a son-in-law and members that, protect this country. And I also have a vested interest, and I've been in healthcare for over 30 years. I started my career with the VA, worked for 3 different VA systems, and I feel like we provided some of the best possible care that's out there. So my fear is that we're going to throw the baby out with the wash water. So I guess I'm wondering what we can do to make sure. I agree there are huge problems, and I believe that people in Ottawa and other communities like ours need better access as veterans to health care. And being able to provide some of that on a local basis would not only help our local hospital and local economy, help those vets as well, but I also don't want to completely do away with what I believe to still be a very good system. Some of the best physicians in the entire country work for that VA system, and I don't want to lose that as well.
Thank you for your family's service to our country. Thanks for your interest in veterans. I've been a member of the Veterans Committee since I went to Congress. I asked for that committee assignment when I was elected to the House. I asked for that committee assignment when I was elected to the Senate. I've worked as a committee member during a time in which we've had 9 secretaries of Veterans Affairs. We've had a good working relationship with the VA, and it's only in the last several years that it seemed to me the VA had kind of shrugged its shoulders, didn't know what to do. We've had lots of challenges in the VA for a long period of time, but always before I had the sense that the VA was working to solve them. And over the last several years, it seems like maybe the problems have become too big and they don't know what to do and nothing happens, just kind of ignoring them. And so I've gotten really involved. I called for the resignation of the last secretary of, I've never called for anybody's resignation, a cabinet secretary before. And he admitted when he announced his resignation that he put too much trust in the people, the upper echelon, his top level folks, and believed what they told him. And I think that was a problem. There was a culture in Washington, D.C. That surrounded the secretary's office that didn't reflect what I hear back in Kansas. And so what I would say is that you're right. I'm a supporter of the VA in its ability to provide services at hospitals that exist today in our state, in Topeka and Leavenworth and Wichita, Kansas City. But we also need to find ways in which we can provide better quality, faster care. And I think there's a generational thing. The veterans who are in the system today, mostly our World War II and Korean veterans, they're pretty happy with the services they get and believe they get high quality care. I think what's happened with the significant number of men and women who returned home from Afghanistan and Iraq, just the numbers have overwhelmed the VA. And it's been difficult to provide. Many have felt they have fallen through the cracks, and that was kind of the eye-opening experience for me. In my conversations with Kansas veterans, it was they had lost hope that the VA was ever going to be able to help them with anything. And so when I tell you that Congress does next to nothing, one of the successes that we had, in my view, was at the very end of the first week in August, before this recess started, we were finally successful in getting a House bill and a Senate bill reconciled and passed and now been signed by the President. What we're trying to do is to allow the VA to have the necessary resources to do their job better, and that generally means more physicians, more healthcare providers, and that's a problem everywhere, private or VA, is how do you attract physicians and nurses and others. And then for folks that have fallen through the cracks, who live long distances from the VA, or who can't get timely service, there's another plan now in place, or another plan to be put in place. And here's what the legislation did. If you live more than 40 miles from a VA facility, by your choice, if you, as a veteran, if you want to access the care at home, you can do so at any provider that is a Medicare certified provider. So you live 40 plus miles from a facility, you get access to care at home. And if the VA can't provide the service within a medically determined amount of time that's necessary to meet your medical condition, normally thought to be someplace between 14 and 30 days for most things. If the VA can't provide the service within that 14 to 30 day period, you get to have your service at home as well. This, in my view, is a good thing. I think of veterans who live, I don't know whether this will mean anything to you. I always use Atwood as the example. If you're a 92-year-old World War II veteran in Atwood up on the Nebraska border, how do you get to Denver to the VA? How do you get to Wichita to the VA? I one time had a veteran call me from Hoxie. Hoxie's in the middle of northwest Kansas, just east of Colby. And his complaint was, Jerry, I called the VA, I need new glasses. I need my glasses adjusted. They're insisting I come to Wichita to see an optometrist there. We have an optometrist in Hoxie, and I can't get to Wichita, but they won't pay for the optometrist here. Those are silly things. Of course, the VA pays mileage for someone to get to Wichita. We would save money by having him see his optometrist at home. And so we get those things figured out. That's the kind of thing that we're trying to avoid. And again, I think there are specialized services, PTSD, brain trauma. Those are things that I don't think you'd ever find at home. The ability to provide those services in Ottawa or Hoxie don't exist. And the VA has a significant role. There's also lots of veterans who prefer to have their care surrounded by veterans. And many people who work at the VA are veterans themselves. And so I've tried to make certain that my criticism is a lot less directed at folks who provide the care and a lot more directed at people in Washington, D.C. who are covering their own posteriors. What I've discovered is that anytime somebody does something wrong at the VA, no one gets fired. They get transferred to another hospital. And those are the kind of things that it just became so bureaucratic. And we saw the wait list, the hidden list. People were pretending that it didn't take so long to get in the VA. I've been arguing with the VA, change the criteria. Rather than determining whether or not you get a bonus, and I think we could have a debate about whether federal employees should receive bonuses, but we can save that or talk about it if you want. But to determine that you get a bonus based upon the wait time of how long it takes for somebody to get in the system, change the criteria. Do a customer satisfaction survey and have the veteran tell you whether they had good service. Calculate that rather than doing something that can be gamed to make it look better than it has been. Thank you for caring.
My name's Chris Patton. I'm the CEO at COF Training Services.
Chris, good to see you again.
You were kind enough to come out and visit us. We really appreciate that. In March of this year, CMS came out with what they call the final rule, the effect of which may be the closure of the sheltered workshop system across the country, which obviously is problematic. And I just wonder if you're aware of that, if you have any thoughts of that on that.
I am aware of it, and we strongly disagree with the decision or the final rule at CMS. I've had this conversation with CMS. I've developed relationship's a bad word in Washington, D.C. I've developed the ability to have a conversation with Marilyn Tavner, the administrator of CMS. we're working to get their attention so that they can see the fallacy or the problems they are creating by this rule. The idea that everything can be done someplace outside a shelter or outside a facility, that everything can be home-based, doesn't reflect reality. And what I would suggest is that you and I, my staff, and you and other directors of facilities and programs, that we come together and make certain that we figure out what we would suggest to CMS. I don't understand how they justify the position that they're taking. I don't even understand how they explain. They just must not believe this is the outcome, because this couldn't be a desired outcome, right? This is what they want?
I think their justification goes back to the civil rights movement, and they're trying to equate it to that, which is important to me, but I don't think there's a direct correlation. I think that's the issue. I think that the other point which you addressed as soon as you came in the room was rural areas are different than city areas. It's just different.
So some of their expectations cannot be implemented in small rural areas. There's not activity, so to speak, that you can just take people out to all day, every day. It just doesn't work that way. It's a different mindset, a different reality.
Well, I would offer to you that we have a conversation with you and other directors in Kansas and see if we can develop a plan for how best I and perhaps other members of the congressional delegation can work to reverse the proposed rule of that's now almost final. That is final. Let me say, I was so impressed with what I saw, and I also have learned in my time in Ottawa there's great pride in what goes on at COS, and it's doing great things for human beings.
Hi, Senator. Again,
morning.
thanks for coming here this morning. My name is Rob Pierce. I own a post-frame construction business, and over the last 3 years, we've seen increasing expenses attributed to OSHA, to DOT, certainly a huge increase in our expenses due to the Affordable Care Act. One of the few bright spots that we had along the way was the accelerated depreciation allowance on capital expenses. Can you share with me the status of that, where we're at currently?
I smile because you did a great job of getting all your complaints in a very succinct a list, and then you shifted to a specific one. What we're talking about here is the ability for a business to depreciate their assets at a certain rate that creates the opportunity for more chance of success in their business. This is part of what's called in Washington, D.C., the extenders package. Almost annually, we pass legislation to extend certain tax provisions that, in my mind, many of them just ought to be permanent, so that you never have to question whether or not this provision is going to get extended for another year. We have not accomplished that this year. The extender package has not been voted on the Senate floor. There's disagreement about what should be in that extender package, and I don't like this answer, but everything I am told and see and read is that after the November election, the extender package will come back to the Senate floor to be passed. I have no doubt but what this provision will be in it. There's lots of other more controversial issues. I think there's broad-based support for accelerated depreciation for a community business climate. And when I say that, it's like this is not necessarily about your business. This is about the people you employ. Your success determines whether or not you're hiring people or keeping people. So I'm supportive of it. The embarrassing answer is that it hasn't been done already. It's already expired. Farmers care about this one. I get more comments from CPAs and farmers on this topic. But this has to deal with how much you can depreciate, how quickly you can depreciate, you buy an asset. And we ought to be encouraging business to buy things, to expand their business, to invest in capital, and hopefully put people to work as a process.
Well, I think one of the things I want to make sure they understand is that I've put off purchasing things for the last 8 months.
Having a consequence to the economy.
Absolutely. So, had it been passed in January, in my opinion, there have been a lot more dollars pushed back into the economy than what there had been simply because people are waiting to see what happens.
I think your wait will be rewarded, but I'm sorry for you and for the economy that you had to wait.
Thank you.
We have time for probably one, maybe two more questions.
What he's saying is it all depends on how long I talk.
You're doing pretty good.
Getting better.
Senator Rand, my name is Dennis Woolman, and thank you for coming to Ottawa. and
Dennis, you're
Franklin
welcome.
County. It's good to see you again. I want to mirror the gentleman just spoke about the accelerated depreciation, because we in business that have our fiscal year set on January the 1st, we need to know what we can do now in order to buy equipment and what have you, so that we can get that accelerated depreciation. After the first of the year, then we've got to wait another year so the economy doesn't improve because of Washington is in the gridlock. The other thing that I would like to mention real quick is the associate, not necessarily the associations, but the VA, the IRS, the Department of Labor, those entities where you are on the appropriation bill, you curtail their budget to a certain extent. They get up the next morning and have a meeting, and they come to us, our businesses, and double their fines to the point that they are getting their income from business through the back door. And that goes directly to their bonuses. And we need to do, and I don't know who decides who in the government gets a bonus from the tax dollars, but it needs to be looked at, because business is going into 360 degrees. If we don't give it to you on the front side, we give it to you on the back side, and it's killing all of the industry.
Thank you very much. You said a couple of things that I hadn't heard before or hadn't thought much about, so that's very useful. Two quick observations. One, I've never believed that an agency of the federal government should be rewarded for finding problems. So what I would want OSHA to do, for example, is to come to your business and say, here's some problems. Let's see if we can work together to make your environment, your work environment, safer, as compared to, I'm going to fine you because it's not the way it ought to be. People ought to be given the chance. I don't know many businesses that would be interested in having an unsafe work environment and given the opportunity to make some corrections that were reasonable and affordable. I think every business person would do that so that no one would get hurt. And yet, and then that ties into the second part. So the incentive ought not be to find, you can find fault, the incentive ought not be to fine somebody. And in some instances, we've had businesses go out of business because of fines by federal agencies. The second part, and I mentioned this kind of in passing earlier, I don't think federal employees, I should just say this, I don't think that federal employees ought to get a bonus. We are paid for what we do, we have a salary, and you fulfill those responsibilities, that's the compensation. And it is agency by agency, but I think you've just pointed the finger at Congress and at me as an appropriator. That's something we could address if we had the votes to do it, to say that bonuses are not the way to do business as a federal entity. I just don't think that's right. We have a job to do, and I don't understand how you deserve a bonus when you do your job.
Well, in the EPA and in the Department of Labor in general, they started out that I'm from the government, I'm here to help you. And they were sincere about it back 25, 30 years ago. Today, that I'm from the government and I'm going to tell you what to do. And if you don't do it, I'm going to give you a fine.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for being here, sir.
You're welcome. I lost the voice. Where am I looking? Oh,
Right
thank
here.
you.
My name is Jack Ray. I'm a 27-year veteran, retired from the Army,
Thank you for your service.
and I'm also the post commander of number 60 of American Legion here in Ottawa, and we appreciate what you did for the veterans and what you're trying to do. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much. I'm glad we had time for another question. Thank you for your service, sir, and thank you for caring about other veterans.
I think we do have time for one more if we still have some questions on the floor.
You're all welcome to stay for the City Commission meeting. I'm sure there's lots of interest
Let's shift the focus, Jerry. Are we in the Middle East or are we not?
Your question suggests to me that that's the problem. I'm not a veteran. I grew up with Vietnam in the back of my life. I graduated from high school in 1972. Vietnamization occurred by 1973. I got a draft number but never was drafted. It went away. My point is that my life is affected by what I saw growing up on particularly the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite every evening in Vietnam. And two things that I think that I hope I learned but believe Americans should have learned is, one, we will always treat our veterans regardless of what their service is, what the American people feel about the war. We should treat our veterans with respect, and they should obtain the benefits that they were promised when they entered service. The other one related to Richard's question is we should never engage in a military endeavor unless we have a plan for victory, and our leaders and the American people are with us from day one till we complete that success. And it seems to me that we're in a position now in Iraq, or in a position really in all of the Middle East, in which we're not really in, we're not really out, and that's the worst of either world. We don't have the commitment to pursue and achieve success, and yet we're unwilling to admit that we can't accomplish that. And so that puts people's lives at risk for no desired outcome. And so, Richard, the answer to your question is, I think your question was the point. We're neither in nor out, and that's the worst place that we could be. Vietnam also teaches me, I think, that we ought to be very reluctant to utilize force, to ask our military men and women to sacrifice their lives. That ought to be at a time in which our national interests are at serious stake. And so we're not the policemen of the world. But we ought to find ways. We ought to have a military that has sufficient capabilities, and we ought to have leadership that is so well respected and their word means something that the threat of the use of military action causes different behavior around the world. And again, I don't think we're in either one of those positions.
Any more questions?
Are you going to be going to Osawatomie, like Trico and stuff?
I've been to Osawatomie. I'm trying to have a town hall. If your question is about another town hall meeting,
like Trico and stuff.
I don't know what your word trico means.
It's like what COF.
Oh, okay.
Like what COF is.
I would be glad to learn about Trico. Be glad to visit Trico.
It's just like what they do.
Okay.
I mean, I think that needs to be looking into more. Because I don't think I used to be under them. They don't do a very good job of what they do. I used to be underneath them.
Well, I might make a suggestion. In fact, if you want to share your name and contact with me, we might try to get your state legislators to visit with you so that Trico would be overseen by agencies in Topeka as compared to Washington, D.C., and we can, if there's problems or complaints about the services they're providing, then you ought to make that known.
Well, I didn't know if you go down that way or not.
No, I do go down that way.
I didn't know if they go.
I always try to find which is the friendliest town, and if Osawatomie is friendly, I'll be there.
Okay, I didn't know, so.
Nope. Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Senator, unless there's some more questions, we just want to say thank you again for being here today. I know if you haven't signed up for that list, what a great way to stay on the pulse of what's happening in Washington, D.C., and we appreciate that you do that on a weekly basis. So please make sure to give me your email, and that's probably also a great way to stay in contact, I would imagine, either way.
Thank you to the mayor and to the city commission for allowing us to meet in your chambers, and thank you to the Chamber of Commerce for hosting us this morning. And anytime you have suggestions how I can do my job better, please let me know.
I want to say one thing before we close. He's got a very good representative in Bill Mays. He does an excellent job in Franklin County and the city of Ottawa.
You know, this has been said to me numerous times this morning. Bill's job is in jeopardy. When people like my staff better than me, they're not around.
Senator, I didn't say that.
All right. I was nervous.
You do an excellent job, too.
All right.
Deliver us a word.
I agree, but Bill is a great guy, and he was the mayor of Iola, as I said earlier, which gives him a perspective about communities in southeast Kansas like yours. And Bill and I got acquainted as I was campaigning for office in 2010. As the mayor, I went to see him on my first visit to Iola. He was in management of Haldex, one of their largest employers, and I arrived at Haldex to meet the mayor on the day that Haldex had announced they were closing their plant. And so Bill and I connected in a very difficult and awkward circumstance. We then tried to help Bill and others in Iola to keep Haldex or to find somebody to replace that significant employer in their community. And Bill just has a great attitude of public service, particularly as it relates to communities across this part of Kansas. It goes back to what I think a significant part of our job is: how can we help? And so thank you for complimenting Bill. Everybody who works on our staff, almost without exception, is a Kansan, and they all come from places like we all come from, and so they bring this perspective of home to Washington, D.C. or to their jobs here in our state. So thanks for the opportunity to be with you this morning. Thank you.